It's estimated that here in the United States, 10% of the total population, or 20 million people, are homosexual. This number is equivalent to the entire population of the state of California.
Do you realize that 1 out of 4 families has a gay person in it?
Let me ask you something. Have you ever had your cock sucked by a man?
Gay men and women have made many strides toward legal, political, and social acceptance in America over the last 3 decades. What are the ramifications? Is this a good thing?
Las Vegas Raiders defensive end Carl Nassib came out as gay on Monday, becoming the NFL's first active player to do so.
You were the first action sports star to come out publicly.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter if I'm called he, she, or they. I feel like post-gender almost.
Hi, sisters.
I've had the revelation that I identify as non-binary.
70% of all adults believe that same-sex marriage should be legal. And this is across the board on the political spectrum.
As we've just seen, things are changing fast. Tech media has radically shifted the landscape of sexual exploration and expression. My name is Eli Martin, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Sniffies. Sniffies is a reaction to the new fluidity that we are seeing today in male sexuality. Sniffies is a modern-day cruising app. We are label agnostic. Regardless how you identify, we are here for you to experience and explore your sexuality without shame or judgments, all enabled by a map interface. Think Pokemon Go, but for sexual experiences. You can find Sniffies at sniffies.com, but please do after the panel today. It can be a little distracting. All right, let's get things started. We've assembled a team of sex experts, queer culturistas, and LGBTQ thought leaders. Please welcome to the stage actor, writer, activist, and author of the national best-selling memoir Sissy, a coming-of-age gender story, Jacob Tobiah. Men's health columnist and author who focuses on kink, fetish, and sexual exploration for people of any gender and sexual identity, Zachary Zane. Out magazine columnist, sexual health writer, queer relationships expert, and a member of 2021's Out 100, Alexander Cheese. Thank you, guys. Okay, I know for myself and for many of us in the audience who are over 30, growing up gay, I understood a strict binary between being straight and gay. I would love to hear from the columnists about their experience growing up queer and their understanding of that binary and when you began to see that change.
I can start. So I'm bisexual, attracted to all genders. I didn't know bisexuality was an option growing up. So I would think I was gay, I would think I was straight. I remember I got to college and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try hooking up with a guy. I went to Vassar, one of the gayest schools there is. And I had to get so drunk to the point that I was vomiting in the middle of him blowing me.
So hot.
It's so hot, right?
Oh.
And the next day, I expected to have this like epiphany where it would be, oh, I'm definitely gay, touching his lips was everything, or I really hated it and knew I was straight. And when I didn't have this polarizing response, I had no idea what that meant. So I got drunk and hooked up with guys for the next 5 years till I saw a therapist. And I'm doing the very quick abridged story here.
Yeah.
And essentially after like my second session with him, I'm going on this rant about how I'm so confused. And he interrupts me and he goes, you seem clearly bisexual. Is there something I'm missing? And I go, that shit doesn't exist in men. And he goes, Zach, you're too smart to think that. But every bi man, or a guy who came out as bi, shortly came out as gay afterwards. So even though I'm very arrogant and egocentric, I figured I could not be the only bi man in the entire world. That's when I started writing about bisexuality and male bisexuality and learned that there are actually millions of us everywhere, but it's just not an identity that's been as visible as gay, lesbian, and even trans to an extent.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in. I think for me, you know, I've had several journeys on spectrums. I love to run around them. I think that we all do. I think everyone's enjoying that a little bit more as just like a pastime. I think that like spectrum hopping is kind of like, you know, one of the new like hobbies of Gen Z, and I love it, and I live for every single one of them, and they are sweet baby children, and they are like, I'm like their non-binary grandma at this point. But I feel like I look like one of them. Anyway, so, you know, back in the olden days, you know, before smartphones, like, I feel like gay was the word that I used because it was the first word I found, you know? It was, well, and before that, I had words around, like, being a gender failure, right? Like, that's why I called my book Sissy, is because it was the first word that I had to describe being different. Like, it was the first label that was assigned to me. And so, you know, I was like, okay, well, I'll use gay because it sort of felt like a shorthand. And then, you know, as I began to explore my gender more and understand, like, oh, okay, like, I'm sort of a girl, then I was like, well, what does it even mean to be gay, per se, like, if I'm also kind of a hot girl? And so then things just got, like, once you kind of get into any sort of midpoint in the spectrum with your own, like, gender identity and expression, all of a sudden, all the ideas of, like this sort of hetero or homo thing really breaks down, because the idea of, like, being attracted to sameness or difference, like...
Well, the language fails to describe the complexities of sexuality, because if you're non-binary, you're not gay, because you're not a man attracted to other men. There is no word to describe you specifically.
Or at least hetero and homo get weird, because it's like, I feel like when I'm with, I feel like there are times when I've been like with like a gay guy, and I've been like, this is pretty straight. Like, I'm like literally in a hot ass fucking gown, and you're in like a tuxedo, and we're about to go do some terrible things to each other. And I feel like we're kind of a straight couple right now, you know what I mean? And then there are other times where I'm like, I feel like I'm a little bit closer almost to like when it's like two queer femmes, like, and like my lipstick's on your body and your lipstick's on my body, like, that's pretty gay. So, you know, there's all these moments where like it gets messier. And I think, you know, these days when people are like, so like, how do you identify your sexual orientation? That's where I'm like, I don't know, queer, pan, question mark, this question's boring, I don't know what to do with it. Yeah. Alex?
Well, I mean, the question was about a binary, right? Which implies...
How it's like changed.
Yeah, I never, in my life, I never necessarily saw a binary. I always saw three options that you could be gay, straight, or bi. And that has certainly broken down just in the time that I've been out, which, you know, I mean, 20 years.
No,
how dare you? No. I mean, it's, I love the fact that now sexual fluidity, which is this idea that you exist between these hard set labels of gay, straight, bi, is kind of becoming mainstream right now. And I don't know what impetus sort of inspired that. I can't think of a single figure that I think sort of led the charge in that. It feels like it happened very organically, and it happened through app speak, through online culture. I think it happened through Twitter.
And this leads to the next question.
Yeah.
Do we think the internet has caused this to change? Like, how has the internet influenced guys to be able to explore their sexuality? Big question.
That's a biggie. Well, I mean, I write about kink, and kink is a big focus of what I do, and kink belongs on the internet now. Like, kink is a Twitter thing now, because, you know, I mean, fetish bars are closing left and right. The leather bar is increasingly an antiquated concept. Bathhouses are closing en masse, especially over the course of the last 40 years. So I think that especially niche fetish communities only find their fellow practitioners online now. And you're seeing a younger and younger generation who now has digital access to niche fetish communities, discovering them for the first time, whereas in the past they would, you know, unless you were in a city where there was a leather bar, or you were in a place where you could access this culture in person, and generally it took some time to do so, then you had no awareness that it even existed. And so I think you're seeing kink itself, kink and BDSM, become much more commonly practiced and much more discussed and standardized and accepted among even very mainstream audiences.
So, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think mainstream publications are recognizing that sex is part of sexual health and mental health. So that's the way you have, like, I write for Hearst, I write for Men's Health, I write the sex and relationship advice column there. And my unofficial role there is to get every straight man into pegging. That is what I've taken that role to be. But like, I'm allowed to write these types of articles in a way that I could not 5 years ago, or when I started writing 8 years ago, that would not have been accepted in mainstream publications. I only was writing for Pride.com, Out, The Advocate, HIV+ Mag. Now, because we're seeing that connection between mental health and sex, we're allowed to have more nuanced and deeper conversations that include sexual fluidity in a way that
in a mainstream
publication.
Absolutely.
It's incredible that that's been allowed to happen.
That's incredible. So speaking of the internet generation, let's talk about Gen Z. It's been fascinating and inspiring to see how Gen Z is essentially reinventing sexuality on the internet and sexual identity in real time. 1 in 5 Gen Zers identify as something besides straight, and at the same time, we're seeing the highest dating app use ever. So my first question is, why do you think Gen Z is so open to exploring their gender and gender identity?
I mean, I think, to me, it feels pretty clear what it's about, right? Exploring your gender is actually just joy, right? Like, exploring your gender is a joyful, wonderful process for every human being on this planet, right? Each of us are better people and happier people and more whole people and more healed people from exploring our gender, from seeing what different things feel like, right? From taking something that we were told we couldn't wear, putting it on, looking in the mirror and being like, huh. You know, like I think that moment is such a moment of radical joy and such a moment of beauty. Yeah, and for a very long time, because culture was pretty anti-democratic, right? I mean, it still has issues in terms of how democratic it is, but because it was difficult to just put an image that you'd created into circulation without the sort of means of production, it was difficult for people to share that moment of joy, and so it had to be clandestine. It was put away, and I think that there's a way in which now, yes, it's incredibly popular, right? Like, yes, it's viral to play with your gender. Yes, like, it tracks well on social media in terms of, performance and likes and shares and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of what's actually happening, which is that people are finding freedom, right? Like, yeah, it may be popular, but like, that image is a form of freedom, right? Like, that's Harry feeling free in a really different way than he thought he could, right? And I think it's important that we don't forget those stakes, and don't forget how personal that journey is and how beautiful it is, even though it kind of has this panache of being modern and popular, right? That's how I feel about it.
Any comments from you guys? You good?
I just agree.
Yeah. Amazing. So next part of this is, how is anonymity online helping us jump into fantasies and fetishes and exploration? I feel like maybe Alex would be a good one to start on that.
Why are you saying that? Anonymity, it affords people, I mean, in some sense, anonymity online is not a new concept. It's an extension of the anonymity that people had when they cruised like the West Side Highway and the parks of New York City, right? Like, there's always been a benefit to anonymous sex and the fact that it protects people. Anonymity online, I think, largely serves the same function. It allows you to step in and try out spaces and dialogues that you would not be able to without the cover of anonymity. Now it's just more accessible. We have more places to be anonymous. I think there's actually a lot more risk involved with anonymous sex online that we don't necessarily talk about or think about. There's the risk of your internet history, your browsing history, your data being tracked. So I do fear that there's a greater risk of exposure, especially in unfriendly places, even with anonymous sex platforms. But more people are coming into the fold. And so that's going to change the number of people who have access to queerness or, to gay sex or to, fetish or whatever.
And I think that translates to real life. I think of how I was, embarrassed of my more out there kinks, and through using gay hookup apps, I was able to openly discuss what I was into, and then so many other guys were into it as well, so you felt less alone. And now I go on a date, a first date, and I can talk to a guy about like, oh, I'm into this weird shit, and him not be turned off, even if he's not into it the same way. I think when you're used to sending 10 million nudes to random strangers online.
Why did you look at me when you said that?
And asking, what are you into? And you hear about the various kinks and fetishes of different people, and you're allowed to be so forward about it. That helps, and it translates to real life, which I think is phenomenal. I think that's important.
The other thing that I think is important to emphasize around anonymity is that there are different flavors of it, right? That there's anonymity that's kind of this like retro thing where it's like, yeah, it's part of the sexual practice where it's hot because we don't know each other, and like that's fucking hot and really fun.
Face down, ass up.
Yeah, like there's that kind of anonymity where it's like where it's a choice that you're making, right? And I think that like chosen anonymity is the goal here, right? That where that's like, it's a practice that if it works for you and it's hot, you should be able to choose that and enjoy that and have great, wonderful anonymous sex. But also that there is coerced anonymity in terms of social norms and social pressure, and we still see a ton of that, right? And I say that as someone who, it is really difficult. I'm not personally into like anonymous hookups like so often, especially because for me, I feel a lot of that coerced pressure from some of my partners when they're like, I can't acknowledge that I'm into someone like you. I can't make peace with that in myself, so you can't know who I am. And that part feels shitty, right? Whereas one day, I think we're gonna get to a place, and very quickly, I think we're getting to a place, and if I have anything to do with it, tomorrow we're gonna get to that place. I'm gonna fuck my way to that place. But I feel like, we will get to a place where that kind of coercion, you won't have to worry about it as much. It'll feel like a retro kind of like, let's explore the trauma that came from that, but in a hot, fun way. But obviously we can go to dinner in public and I don't have to worry about like what that says about my masculinity that I'm sitting across the table from you,
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of anonymous sex. I think it's my primary sexual thing. And I'm having to always contend with the fact that though I have absolutely nothing to hide, I've literally written about my sex life for a decade. So I mean, I'm an open book, and I just prefer anonymous sex. By having lots of anonymous sex, I'm invariably having sex with people who are having it because they're protecting their sex life from their wives, and they're deeply in the closet. And so navigating their comfort, whether or not they're doing this intentionally or through necessity, becomes a part of anonymous sex. Like, there's an agreement that I'm protecting you by virtue of being here and doing this.
Right, and I think it's just a question. For me, it's a lot of times that protection feels like I'm protecting you from your shame about me, not your shame about you, And I'm like, that's the part where it starts to can feel a little bit like, because I understand needing safety, right? Like I'm
or
not
just shame.
Right.
Shame is the big joy killer. Yeah.
Well, we still have a far way to go, I think, for sure, which we made a point here. But let's also talk a little bit about social media. So we've begun to see people commodify their identities and on social media. And if so, what effect does this have? And I'm not like putting this on you. Like, potentially you guys have commodified your identities by being who you are. But what is that? What do we think about that? And people on social media doing it.
Why are you looking at me?
I think this is that question, yeah.
No, I mean, because I definitely lean into being bisexual. It is a brand. What New York Daily Mail called me a mega bisexual influencer, and I hope they put that on my grave when I die. I think there's a way to do it authentically that's not necessarily diminishing it. Like, yes, this is my brand, I lean into it, I'm commodifying it, but everything I say is honest. Everything I say is important for the bi community, and it's helping the bi community and poly community and just queer community at large. I don't think it necessarily has to go against one another. I think it could be kind of mutually beneficial and just kind of a part of what it is now. I think there are those people who are commodifying it in a way that are definitely for the sake of likes, for the sake of fame. And that's when it gets a little bit more murky, and I just question the authenticity and reasoning as to why they're doing it. So it depends, I guess I'll say, in short.
Yeah. I would also, I mean, a few things that I have on sort of the idea of commodification of identity online. One is that I think we forget about some of the real people who are commodifying our identities most, which is the owners of these tech companies, right? Like the person who has commodified my non-binary identity more than anyone on the planet is Mark Zuckerberg, because that dude makes money off of my identity more than anyone else, right? Like these CEOs who don't share these identities, who don't really care about people like us, who could really care less, right? Who aren't gonna ever have a non-binary person on their fucking board, right? Like, these people are sitting there like making money hand over fist off of all of our cultural creation and our liberation.
While at the same time disproportionately censoring our creations. I mean, we're seeing I reported out this, the incredible uptick in LGBTQ censorship on social media. Terms that define queer sex and queer identity are flagged at a higher rate, posts are taken down at a higher rate than heterosexual content or non-queer content. So yes, they are profiting off of us, but by virtue of being a community that literally defines itself quite often, usually by sex, we end up becoming disproportionately censored, and that acts as a form of erasure across the entire LGBTQ community.
Right.
So
they're sort of having their cake and eating it too.
They're literally profiting us while erasing us.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think like that side of it, we think about like the individual influencer and the person we're seeing, but we always forget that we're on an app that is owned and capitalized by predominantly cis hetero white fucking men, right? And they still just like don't care about like fixing that at all. And we're at South by, so I need to say that extra loudly because they're literally here somewhere. Like fuck all them. But the other thing I will say too is that this idea of commodifying your identity can also be like a double-edged sword linguistically, because I didn't have a choice, right? Yeah. Like my identity is so disruptive to people's ideas of the world, right? Not by choice, like not I don't think of it as such. I actually think my gender is really fucking boring, y'all. Like my style's cute, but my gender's not that interesting, right? Like the shade of lipstick I wear and the way I put on my Fenty is pretty good. But like the fact that I wear a lipstick, I'm like, can everyone fucking get over it? Like it's not, this is boring. But I had to kind of work my way through it to get to a place of like artistic freedom of expression for myself, right? Like I had to sell TV shows about non-binary and trans people that centered non-binary and trans experience. I had to publish a memoir because no one would let me do all these things I wanted to do in the world and make all my anti-capitalist fucking nonsense until I sort of helped create a world.
System.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a way in which sometimes this commodification is also our method of economic survival, empowerment, Absolutely. So that we can get to a place of actual artistic freedom and actual economic opportunity. So there's definitely some weirder, more insidious parts of it too, but I don't want to lose sight of those two facts.
Well said.
Very well said.
Well said.
Thank you, Jacob. Next, let's talk a little bit about the algorithm. We've all know the algorithm on the internet through social apps, and sometimes this can show you a very specific subset of people. I know my algorithm mostly shows shirtless, beautiful men. Yours may be different, I don't know, but...
Mine's all butts.
Just butts. All butts.
Don't hate it.
The question here is like, can social media, like through this algorithm, create a more insular version of queerness based on what's being served to you?
A more what version of queerness?
Insular version of queerness. If you're being served, like for me, only these torsos that are beautiful, like am I only seeing that queerness is that,
Or just a more quantified queerness in general, right? Yeah, I mean,
it's showing us what we like, and so like, in one sense, that's great, right? We all want to see what we like. We all want to be served ads that we'd want to buy from. But is this changing queerness based on only what you like, so you're not seeing these other realms that are out there?
I don't think it's changing queerness, but you are only getting a subsection of queerness. And unfortunately, just the way that algorithms work, the onus is going to be on you as the consumer to make sure to branch out, to follow different creators you usually wouldn't, to click on different things and make sure you like different things. So that comes up more. It's a shame that that's the reality of it, but otherwise you're going to get that echo chamber or that bubble or the same hot cis white dudes with abs. I don't see any other way kind of around that.
Well, I mean, Zach and I both write content, right? And I mean, I'm sure you've shared this experience where I'll come up with a headline that mentions queer or mentions like a niche part of the LGBTQ community, and an editor will say, no, we have to make the headline gay, because people aren't searching for this more niche term. They're searching for gay. To make the content most accessible to beginners and newcomers, you have to use the most simplified terms.
And for SEO too.
And for SEO too, yeah. Well, I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And so what that does is it makes we assume that the most simple terms and the most known terms and communities under the LGBTQ umbrella they end up just getting pushed forward, and they end up being the first thing you see. And I've found that, you know, a lot of people will just stop there. I mean, if you're coming out of the closet, you're looking up information and you don't know where to go, you will search gay. And if you find the information you need, I mean, at least certainly in my life, I stopped there for a while, and I never thought that there might be other areas of queerness beyond gay. And that wasn't because I had a limited imagination, it was because I had limited information. And we've certainly, to an extent, fed into that.
Well, it's tough. So a lot of Men's Health has older readers. And if I use the word pansexual or ambisexual, polysexual, any one of these kind of like neo-identity labels, they would not have found me. Because the only word they know is bisexual. And when you're Googling bisexual, I wouldn't have come up if I said pansexual. And I've helped these men incredibly, these married men who have come out to their wives. They're happier than they've ever been. They have a more egalitarian relationship with their wives. Everything is great. They would not have found me. So in order to reach this audience, these are the words that I have to use. And then in the actual article itself, I make sure bisexual, I say pansexual and try to include it. But it's hard. I don't know, I want to make sure I'm reaching people, and that's the best way I can, so it's kind of unfortunate. I don't know how to solve that.
Well, I mean, I was working on staff at Advocate when they made the editorial decision to embrace queer. I mean, we had so much hate mail, the comments on articles when we had, because Advocate's readership is very, you know, it's older, it's just left of center, and we had a lot of readers who remember queer as a slur, and so there was a big debate in the office about whether or not, I mean, it's the longest running LGBTQ publication of its kind. It's the only publication to be around before Stonewall. So their decision to make that choice is momentous, right? And on a board, we sat down and we thought, okay, we're gonna get a lot of hate mail for this, we're gonna get angry comments, but we have to standardize queer as a word, because if we don't, then who else is going to? And it was, I mean, for a year, it was the single most contentious thing on the website. I mean, we lost memberships or views left and right. And now it's part of the editorial handbook, and it is used, you know, in almost every article. And we really had to push for that, because queer is a new term. Within living memory, it was a very, very offensive slur. And in that time, it's become a term that went from being niche and being lesser known. It was never gay, until now I think it is kind of closer to gay. And queer defines so many identities beyond just gay. Queer, the term helps the community become less commodified and more expansive and more embracing of different kinds of people.
In terms of algorithms, you know, from a different perspective, what I think about a lot is like self-esteem within our community. You know, I think one thing that really unites like trans, non-binary, gay, like the whole community, although really with the exception, and the beautiful exception, and God bless them, of like, I think queer women are better at this. They are just so much better at this. But I think the rest of us are dysmorphic as fuck.
Like, I just think that like gay culture is dysmorphia culture, right? Trans culture is dysmorphia/dysphoria culture, and the line between those things is a lot thinner than anyone wants to acknowledge. I mean, I went to a doctor to start, to talk about like getting on hormones potentially, because I wasn't sure, and I'm still never sure. I feel like everyone's like, oh, you ever gonna really do it? And I'm like, I don't know. It's like Schrodinger's pussy, baby. You never know what's gonna come out of the box. But like, I feel like I remember I sat down with my doctor and I was like, so how do you kind of just medically, I'm just curious, how do you define the difference, but like the line between dysmorphia and dysphoria? And they were like, so estrogen gives you breast tissue? And I was like, that's not the question I asked. And so, and I think about this because it's a really uniting force where these algorithms are very predatory upon that, right? Like, and they don't, and I feel like if you are already sort of struggling with some kind of dysmorphia, which I think a lot of us are, and maybe I'm just projecting onto y'all, like you can let me know if I'm doing that. But like once you start down that track, it just says, oh, this is what you like. Oh, this is how we hook you. You're a user. We're trying to keep you addicted. The way that we do this is by making you hate yourself, right? And like we're gonna turn you on and make you hate yourself. And it sort of spirals into this thing over and over again. When in fact, what it should say is, hey, maybe you need some different bodies, right? Like maybe you need some different bodies to look at, to feel better about, to feel celebrated. And the algorithm should be bolstering people in a different way and highlighting in a different way that like helps people to feel a little bit better, And that is not necessarily a popular opinion among everybody. There are people who are probably going to disagree with that. But it's very top of mind for me, especially when I think about trans young people, because the images right now that we have such limited visibility among the trans community and among trans people in media, and almost every single fucking known trans person who is allowed to exist on television is a goddamn supermodel, and that is really bad for young people's mental health. Like, we need better. We are desperate for better, and these are really vulnerable young people who need self-esteem, and it's not fair.
All right, thank you. All right, let's move to TikTok a little bit. So queerness is often leveraged on platforms, I mean, outside of TikTok too, but for views, you guys touched on this a little bit, but for views and social clout when we think about queerness. Or how have these platforms been used to do that? And like, what do we think about it? And is it okay? This also leans into a little bit with a word called queerbaiting. And for those of you who don't know what it means, it's essentially hinting or gesturing to the possibility of queerness in order to capitalize on it. So it could be even like Harry Styles that we saw earlier wearing a dress. Like we could kind of say that's queerbaiting in a way, or is that exploration? Take it to the panel.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
So my operative theory is that 97% of people who are queerbaiting are like actually exploring.
I believe that.
And like are probably pretty pan or bi.
They have an interest, I would assume, but I mean, I have no idea. You know what I mean? Like, but
you don't have a Rolodex?
I don't. But I think it can be a genuine form of just expression and exploration. I also personally, and other people will disagree, don't think queerbaiting is necessarily that terrible of a thing in terms of all the issues that are affecting LGBTQ people. Like, to get up in arms about queerbaiting, someone showing who's not identifying as queer, wearing a dress, or making out with a dude for clout, like, okay, not ideal. There are worse things you can do than like, okay, accept this in a way to try to get our money, and then it's up to us as queer people if we want to give our money to these things. But it's just like, I think of the trans community, like there's just so much more issues going on that it doesn't really bother me that much. It's visibility regardless.
Well, also queerbaiting is, the whole term is built on the assumption that you can read whether or not someone's being authentic or not. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really, I don't know, like no one can make that call. Like I can't, if I see somebody who's alleged to be queerbaiting in media, then that is me saying, you don't sincerely believe this, you're being authentic, and you're trying to appeal to me for money. And who am I to say that someone's being inauthentic? I think that's a really pig-headed sort of position to take. So I don't know if I think that queerbaiting, I mean, I'm sure that it exists, but I would much rather believe in a world where people are actually truly exploring. And I think that that's increasingly the case in the world that we're in today.
And on the Harry Styles note of it all, because I feel like everyone wants the hot take, and they want me to say that like Harry Styles is co-opting trans aesthetic and it's bad, right? And they want me to say that, and that's not how I feel, because that's not true. Like, no one owns gender. Like femininity is owned by no one, masculinity is owned by no one. They aren't even that real, right? Like no one that, and like the moment you get into ownership around gender, it's like, surprise, you just stumbled into TERF ideology, and that sucks. So like, I don't like that. And I think, you know, the what's beautiful is like watching people explore that, right? Like, I think that that, you know, Harry's Vogue shoot was stunning, and I think that you could see the freedom and joy that he felt in those clothes. And I think that that is just another strategy for our liberation here. What I wish is that when people were doing that kind of stuff, I wish they would acknowledge publicly the context in which they're doing it and politicize it a little bit more. And that's the only sort of issue that I have sometimes, is that I'm like, if you're gonna be doing this and sort of like making such a splash, can you acknowledge that the reason you're allowed to make a splash is because you presented as cis for so long in your career, because you still identify as cis? I think he still identifies as cis, right? Like, and that from that protected space, you're allowed to wear a dress and be on the cover of Vogue, whereas like Vogue will never even call someone who's non-binary to be on the, well, I mean, they're changing slowly, but like, you know, there's power differentials, and more importantly, you got to be able to do that because of all of us lowly non-binary gender freaks on the internet who like actually created the space in which you could do that safely and not totally and I think a little acknowledgement would be nice from folks when they do that kind of thing, a little bit more connection and a little bit more of an effort to be in community with us and be, you know, gender non-conforming trans weirdos. If you're gonna use our, if you're gonna play in the sandbox, then like hang out in the sandbox with us. That's all I'm saying. It's fun.
And I do like the idea of expanding what masculinity is. I like the fact that he is identifies as cis, is I think it's important. You can be a cis straight man who wears a dress and wears makeup, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're non-binary, doesn't mean you're trans. It means let's expand and allow for fluidity within gender expression, within masculinity, within femininity, without having to immediately be queer. I think is very important.
And I totally agree with that. Yeah. But I think it's important to acknowledge.
No,
that,
acknowledge 100%.
Yeah, that, like,
no, I agree.
You get to do that by the grace of non-binary and trans people who have been like fighting and being like assaulted and shit for, you know, decades, such that you can have your fluidity and fun, right? Like,
exactly.
It's important to know who made your shit. You know, it's important to know where it came from. Like, you need to know where your food's grown. You need to know who built the gender that you're allowed to inhabit now safely, right? Like, these are important things. But we agree.
Yeah, no, we are.
Always the showstopper over here. Okay, so we're going to touch on media and entertainment for a minute. I'm sure many of you have seen the show Euphoria out there.
Jacob,
also,
your thoughts?
A few other teenage dramas that maybe only I've seen, but Gossip Girl, Riverdale, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Elite, okay, maybe no one. But anyways, all these shows are featuring more and more characters with a fluid sexual journey. And I think it is important that these actually are teenage dramas, because these are what these teenagers and younger people are watching these days. And so my question is, what effect do these characters have on viewers?
I'm not a big TV watcher, so I'm gonna let you guys.
Even as a concept,
Go for it, Jacob.
like putting more fluid characters in shows, and these are truly fluid characters, I will say. It's not like your Will and Grace, like, you know, having a gay guy being flamboyant. It's like actually having guys who are interested in men and women and doing different things, and it's very fluid in that way.
I mean, I think it's amazing. I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish about it, but like my life is better because these people are on television, right? Like my existence in this world is safer. I find more affirmation. I face less economic discrimination, right? Like, and I work in television, right? Like, I mean, I'm an author, but I'm also like producing is kind of my more like behind the scenes sneaky thing, because you can't talk about all your cool TV projects that you have in the works and your cool feature films because like until they come out, so like y'all just keep waiting. But yeah, I think it's everything. I mean, gender is socially constructed, and these vehicles are rebuilding it completely. What I do think we need to continue to work on on is ownership, like queer and trans ownership of that content, right? If you're gonna have a trans star of your show, you'd better damn well have a trans executive producer. Y'all always look at the executive producer credits in every TV show you watch. We gotta get better about this shit, because those are the people who make real money and have real creative control in Hollywood. And I had to spend a decade becoming an executive producer, and there are like 7 trans people with, like, and non-binary people with executive producer credit and selling power in Hollywood. And like, we need support from the public that there needs to be more of that, right? Like, and I think that we need to kind of become more Shania Twain about these things. And if someone's like, oh yeah, I have a non-binary character and a bi character in my fucking show, and it's like, cool, well, like, if you don't have a, you know, non-binary,
don't impress me much.
Exactly, right? Like, if the creative team and the main people making the money and who controlled the narrative and who get to ultimately say what goes in the show, if those people aren't also bi and non-binary, and if the executives at the networks buying it also aren't, because there's like 3 trans or not, I mean, I don't know if there might be 1 trans executive at any television network in the entirety of Hollywood. I swear to God, I think there might actually be one. I know of one. So like, we have a lot of work to do behind the scenes, but the front of house is looking pretty fucking cute right now.
Yeah, I think about when I was struggling with my identity, there was not a single male bisexual character on TV, period. When I was trying to figure this out like 12 years ago. I remember Googling bisexuality just to see like bi man, and what came up were studies about bi men spreading or having HIV, or 10 things to never say to a bisexual person. Like that was it. And I just wonder, I didn't think bisexuality was real. If I had these shows, like, you know, Gossip Girl has so much male bisexuality, like, fuck, that would have changed my life. I wouldn't have years of being an alcoholic, doing a shit ton of drugs, being depressed, anxious, and barely getting through life. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So like, yes, visibility is important, I guess is all I'm trying to say. I know, groundbreaking, no one's ever said that before. But yeah, it would have been huge to have it. And I think it has a monumental impact.
Amazing.
I mean, I personally would love to see, and this is sort of like, to me, the last untouched vestige of visibility on TV is, I mean, I've been a sex worker for 10 years, and I have yet to see a positive depiction of sex work. It's always the hooker with the heart of gold who's like right on the fence. We're always like victims of violence or people who are in destitute situations, and we generally pathologize sex work as something that is inherently dangerous or something that you're coerced into doing or don't want to do. And I've yet to see like a happy, well-adjusted, you know, well-paid sex worker with kids, you know, in a regular life at all.
Because it just doesn't make for good TV. That's the issue.
It doesn't make for good TV. It has to.
If you're a shitty writer.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Like, bitch, I could write that. We'll talk.
Okay, let's keep it moving here. I have a good one for you guys. Has sexual fluidity become cool? And is it possible that queerness as a zeitgeist is having a real effect on the world's sexual exploration? Loaded question.
Well, I'm cool.
I was gonna say, we're all very cool up here, and that's
very
important.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's trendy right now to when I hear fluidity, I think of a resistance to a hard label, and so that can mean many things. That can be resistance to the label of like putting a really clear-cut, defined box around your sexuality in terms of being gay or bi or, you know, whatever. Like that is that is choosing by virtue of using that label, you're existing within this box, right? So then fluidity is resisting those labels and saying that you're just going to, you know, be attracted to who you're attracted to. And I do think that is trendy right now. I mean, you have a few figures who are sort of embracing that idea. You do have representation on TV. What that's going to do for the larger culture and community, I don't know. I mean, we are seeing the old labels, right? Like gay, lesbian, bisexual. They are sort of dropping down in their cultural capital lately, and I know there's a lot of resistance to that because a previous generation had to rally behind these words, which is why you do meet. I mean, I work so closely with men, you know, 2 generations older than me who really are offended that gay no longer has the same cultural capital, because that was the word that they literally had to march behind. Like, you're either gay or you're not. Are you one of us or you're not? Because they're battling a plague. And so the modern generation kind of putting these words to the side and saying we're just going to be fluid, I don't know what all that's going to do, but I think it is drastically changing the culture we're living in.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that it's like hip or trending is always a little bit scary, just because that means it won't be, it's only in vogue for right now and it's going to go away. I don't think it's going to go away. It might not have the social capital that it has now, but I think in general we're moving in a positive direction, even if it is quote unquote hip or trendy. And then kind of to what you were saying, Alex, like the fluidity labels, it's tough because it's a double-edged sword, where in the fact that, and I always say this about picking labels, like if labels gives you a sense of community, because you say I'm gay, I'm bisexual, this is my identity, you can meet other gay and bisexual people, that's very important, and you feel at home with it, fabulous. But I think a lot of labels feel just very limiting in the fluidity, and actually inhibits like men to explore. And I say this a lot with guys who are struggling to, I might be bisexual, I might not. I say, hey, let's throw around the label right now. What do you want to do? What do you want to try?
Yeah.
Because even labeling themselves as bisexual, while I see it as a very open and freeing label that allows you to do anything, hence why I love it, they see it as somehow limiting. So I'm like, let's just remove it and actually have you focus on your actions. And if a label comes along later, let's take it. But otherwise, there's no need to. But the last thing on labels I'll say, it can be tough to sometimes rally behind one another when we have so many labels. I kind of say, like, you can have the label that you present almost to the world, the one that more accurately defines you. You can have multiple labels so you can be part of the larger community while also expressing yourself, because otherwise I think we can be a little bit disjointed.
I have one last question, because we're going to do some audience questions after that. And if you didn't see in the beginning, go to slido.com, #Sniffies, if you want to submit a question. But for the last one, we have talked so much about how far we've come, and we would be remiss not to acknowledge the oppression that still many face in our community. Speaking especially with all the anti-trans laws that are happening right now. The last question is, like, what can we do better in like tech and media for those who are beginning to explore their sexuality and gender identities?
Well, I mean, I'll start. I mean, people here are going to be writing the code that we all live our lives in over the next, stage of technological evolution. I mean, we already know that people who code, we're already seeing like racial bias being built into the platforms that we all interact with every day. I think it's very important for queer and non-binary and trans people to be in tech, to be helping create the code that the whole world is going to run on, because every person in the world uses code, just about. Or like, what is it, like 80% of the people in the world use code, and yet less than 5% of people in the world can write code. So we need as many coders from the queer community as possible, creating the systems that we all are going to live on. I think that's extremely important, because they will be able to recognize the bias literally in the system that other communities cannot. But beyond that, to make the technological world that we're all going to live in the future one day better, I think that we have a massive battle ahead of us in terms of sexual censorship. We're seeing an increase in censorship online for images, for text. I write about sex, and in the past, you could write the word sex and it wouldn't get flagged, and now Instagram flags the word sex. So, it's no longer just images, text, it's language. We're seeing an uptick in policing. It's no longer a free internet. So the most important struggle I think we have ahead of us in tech is to say that sex is good, and it's not gonna go away, and it's good for you, and all efforts to censor and eliminate discussions of sex are gonna create a public health crisis. An information crisis is gonna create decreased access to information about contraceptives and women's health. I mean, we're going to see I think that particular struggle, the struggle to de-police the internet in terms of sex, is going to get worse before it gets better. But every person, especially people here, needs to be as vocal and vigilant about that as possible, because that's terrifying to me.
And Zach and Jacob, last quick comments, and then we'll move on to questions.
Well, you know, on sort of this idea of like this being cool or a fad, I don't think it's a fad, because I think it's the kind of thing where like it's a Pandora's box where when you expand human freedom, people don't forget that, right? Like it may not have the same level of, it may not feel counter to anything in the future. It may just feel part of culture, but that's amazing. Because like, you know, when I think about this being sort of, you know, sexual fluidity being this fad or this like thing, or like, oh, now it's cool to be sexually fluid, what that actually translates for those of us who only can really find partnership in people who identify that way and who are circulating in the world that way, is like, I spent, you know, the last decade of my life feeling like no one would want to bring me to a party as their date, right? Like as their like, I'm dating this person date, right? That like, I was not someone that people could be proud of or people could feel cool showing up with. Because it was a little too weird, you know, and like certainly in gay world, like, oh, you're dating a femme, like whatever, right? Like that was very much the attitude. And all of a sudden, like lightning, I don't know what the hell has changed. I don't know when exactly it tipped, but all of a sudden it's like, I feel like I live in a world where people would be proud to show up with me, you know? And like that, yeah, like that's what I'm saying. Like, and so, you know, yeah, we can talk about it in tech and talk about it, whatever, but like in the grounded real world of my life, like, my life is better. Our lives are better. We are freer and happier and more joyful. And I love that that's where we're landing, that's where we're growing toward, and that's what seems to be the future we're building together. Governor fucking Abbott be damned, that piece of shit. Fuck him.
Wait, Zach, 15 seconds.
No, I'm good. What you guys said was great.
Amazing. Okay, we're gonna take some questions. We got some questions? Let's see what we got. Okay, what would a reinvented masculinity look like, and how could it change our world?
Okay, sure. That is a tougher question to answer. I don't think I could do that in the next minute here. I think, and people might disagree with me on this, I think while the way we are treating men right now, and I don't want to say woe is men, but I think we need to do a little bit more of a call-in culture as opposed to a call-out culture. Like, yes, cis men need to fucking check their privilege and understand what they're doing. But it's like, we know how fragile men are. That's what we're making fun of. We know of male tears. And so we have to kind of hold their hand a little bit more. We have to be kinder. It's unfortunate, but this way of being openly antagonistic is only going to solidify men being shittier, men being toxically masculine.
Well, because it's important to remember that men are victims of toxic masculinity as well, right? We are indoctrinated into a world that teaches us to behave this way, and that perpetuates violence. And so there's two things that are happening. There's a global reckoning happening, you know, with the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement. There's a reckoning happening that's led by women, and I don't see the same thing happening that's led by men. You know, I at least not to the same extent. I don't see enough, you know, men rising up and coming forward and saying, you know, that we are also victims of these ways of thinking, and we have to change. And that is a really important movement that needs to build more steam.
I mean, yeah, like everybody has gender-based trauma. Like every man on this planet is walking around with a ton of it. The process for me of being masculinized, of being made into a man, or the failed attempts everyone tried. You know, they tried to recruit me and I was like, no, I ain't having it. But I feel like, you know, the attempts that were made for me, like, I mean, it was such a violent process. It was a really traumatizing process. There was so much healing work that needs to be done. And to me, a transformed masculinity looks like one that no longer looks at masculinity as some edifice of power, but looks at it as a place of real vulnerability for young children. right? Like these are children who are being brought into a deeply violent culture and a deeply violent way of being that is really emotionally repressive. It's like being conscripted into some kind of army, you know, and it's really rough. And I think a transformed masculinity would look at its genesis with compassion and would look at it with a real human, like a humanizing of the young people who are going through that experience and the older people who had to go through that experience.
And I just think about it in terms of like the sex positive movement, how you have like magazines like Cosmo, 17, who changed completely from how to please your man in whatever the 80s or 90s to how to be a boss ass bitch, which is fucking amazing. And no longer tolerating a level of just abuse or bullshit from men. You do not see that in men's publications the same way. So we're having a conversation where, like, for lack of better words, women are getting woker, understanding like men and their bullshit, yet men are not a part of that. And if you plan on still sleeping with men or dating men or talking to men or working with men or existing in the entire world, men need to be a part of this. The conversations are happening parallelly between genders, and I think that's very bad.
And how much time do we have left? Just a quick check. We're good? Okay, cool. Let's do the next question. Will there be a time when we can completely do away with labels?
Can I answer that one? I don't want there to be a time that we ever completely do away with labels. I think that labels are... I'm pro-label. I'm just going to be totally honest. I run a sex advice blog that is pretty popular, but I tend to tackle the more like niche, taboo, darker sexual subjects that I don't see written about in mainstream outlets. So that's my world. But same as you, I get a lot of people messaging me like, which label do I use? And I don't necessarily feel comfortable with this label, I don't feel comfortable with this label, and I say labels are tools, not cages. Labels are things that serve a purpose. They're not boxes you have to fit in. And which is to say that they do serve a purpose. They serve a very practical, useful purpose. They help you find community. They help you build community. They help you create a sense of self. That's not to say that they have to exist forever, but they can exist right now if they're serving the function that you need them to serve. And I think that's why they're useful.
And I think there's an irony between not doing labels and then doing a shit ton of labels. Because at the end of the day, you have all these contradictory labels essentially saying, I'm all of this and none of this at the same time. So I think that's an interesting thing to note. But it's exactly what Alex said. If it's helpful, take it. If not, don't.
Try something else on.
Try something else.
Right.
When I get that stuff now, I'm like, who cares? Suck a dick. Like that's all it is. Just like explore, have fun. You don't have to overthink it. No navel gazing. Just relax.
Well, and wouldn't it be fun if our like identity labels just felt more like genres of like music or something, you know, where they're little like
I'm metal.
Exactly, that's what I mean. Like it could be more creative and sexy and fun, right? Like, and it wouldn't be like, so are you gay or straight? It'd be like, what kind of music you into? Yeah. You know what I mean? And it'd be like cute and hot, and I'd be like, well, I'm into like chaotic post-punk, and like you can like, you know, get into sub niches of niches of niches of niches. But the whole reason it's okay to do that is because there's not some like gargantuan political stakes in it as much. You know, like you get to just listen to what you want to listen to and enjoy it, and like every music has its listeners, and like yeah, some things are more indie and exist in smaller clubs or whatever, and some things are going to be like Ariana Grande, right? Like, but everyone has their spot, and like everybody has their audience, and all artists get to like play for whoever they want to play, you know, like.
But I completely agree. I do believe that there still is political stakes behind labels,
sure.
And because you know, I take a cue from the people who, from our forebears, many of whom are no longer with us, who battled a plague. I mean, they rallied around like you know, the Dyke March. I mean, like they took words that had stigma, like we're here, we're queer, get used to it. That was an anarchic thing to say in its time. I mean when you know, when ACT UP New York debuted "We're Here, We're Queer," that was a slur, a very, very violent slur at the time. And you know, so they took words that had weighted cultural power and organized movements behind them in order to combat political challenges. Yeah. And you needed to unify around words. You needed to simplify, which is why they had to sort of kind of decide, okay, we're all going to be gay, because gay had to be a political force, right?
It's almost like in a perfect world we could do away with labels, but
it's not a perfect world.
But it's not a perfect world, yeah.
But maybe we could have a more relaxed one in an
That's
ideal
what's- yeah.
future, right?
Yeah.
In an ideal
Yeah.
future. And this is very idealistic because Lord knows we aren't in that world yet. Thanks for that reminder, Alexander. That was really helpful.
Let's try to fit in one more, two more, one more.
We can fit in two.
Two? Yes. What
Hey-o.
can queer creators do to advance conversations around gender and sexual exploration? Queer creators. So, like social media, things like that.
I mean, keep doing what we're doing. I think we're working on it and try to keep being inclusive, talking about various gender identities, labels.
I think it's less around what we as queer creators can do and trans creators. It's more about what curators above us can do to ensure that like our community is actually not being cherry picked so in such a limited way for elevation, right? But like is actually given that we're giving elevation to the people who our community itself is elevating, right? Because if we did that, then like Alok would be on the cover of fucking Vogue literally tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like it would have already done it 12 years ago or something. And that would be cooler to me because it's like our community is clearly spoken, right? And then like this motherfucker has the best fashion in the game and is amazing and has so much to say. But these curators are like, I don't know if we can put this person on the cover of a magazine. It's like, grow up.
Well, also, I mean, vote for the candidates that support a free internet. I mean, that's a real thing. Like, you know, we are facing unprecedented internet censorship, and that is not a political talking point. You know, we're going to be at a new election in 2 years, and no politician is talking about the freedom of the internet. And that's terrifying because our lives happen on the internet. Our art is on the internet. I mean, Tom Bianchi is a famous photographer who photographed the entire AIDS epidemic and got his account banned on Instagram. Like, that is our history being eliminated before our very eyes, and to no disruption or fanfare. There's no movement whatsoever saying that Instagram is over policing historical art. That's scary. That's a problem because the way that we get information out there now is online. I mean, you know, like I used to work for an organization that cataloged historical documents from the AIDS epidemic, and I found the pamphlets that the Gay Men's Health Crisis used to disseminate throughout the city. And I started interviewing older men about where and when, or if they found these pamphlets. And nobody even knew about them because they just didn't have a reach. They couldn't put a pamphlet in every person's hand. The internet's a way better tool to disseminate information. It actually is a good thing. But if it's policed, then whole communities are erased. So
Okay,
that's...
each take one question from there. You can argue for which one you get. Whoever speaks first gets to do it.
Wait, which question?
Whichever one you want.
Sure, I can do whose responsibility is it to hold on cis men's hands? And, whose responsibility is it to hold on to cis men's hands as we reshape masculinity? Cis women are tired of carrying that burden and doing that work. I want to answer that because I hope I didn't make it seem like the responsibility is on cis women when I gave my response. I mean, it's of course at the end of the day it's going to be on the men, and I hope there are more men who feel empowered to help reshape masculinity. What I was saying about kind of women's involvement is not necessarily holding the burden and teaching them to do everything, but allowing a little bit more grace, I think is what it is. But no, at the end of the day, it's going to be on men who are the guys talking about this to help other men listen. Also, because we live in this patriarchal world where men have power, men are probably more likely to listen to other men than women, which is fucked up and speaks to toxic masculinity. So it is a time for men to step up. But the burden should not be on cis women or trans women or any woman whatsoever.
I'll take that last one around how we can empower young queer people to speak up and do more things in their jobs for changing social norms. I think the really important thing and I'm just going to be very quick on this. I think that anti-capitalism is super important and that we need to be able to name who's controlling our jobs and that we need to be able to organize against the people who are controlling our jobs often, and we need unions and we need labor protections because you will be able to make incredible work if you don't have to report to someone who is censoring you, right? And if you have the ability to push back when they try. And I think that like we have really forgotten on the left how important these types of organizing are, right? Like identity politics matter deeply, but we also have to have a structural economic analysis that exists in tandem with that, right? Because that's sort of another layer of analysis that often just kind of gets left off because they want us to forget about it, right? Like, so I think that's really, really critical.
And we are unfortunately at time, but this was so exciting. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all. You guys are amazing. If you have more questions, I'll put the social media for these guys up on the screen. Reach out. But thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, everyone. It was awesome.